I wanted to continue more or less where I had left off last time. Due to low phone battery, I had to cut it a little bit shorter than I would have liked to last time to an hour and about, what was it, 15 minutes or so because my phone was about to die. But I came prepared this time. So I had charged it and yeah, I guess I'm ready to rock. So here we go. Yes, tonight I wanted to focus a bit more on China since I never really got to finish what I was saying in the last stream in regards to them, as well as focusing on some other issues, but mostly on China. And I wanted to start with how they are forming their own version of the coalition of the willing, as they say. So, um, I don't know if you all remember the second Iraq War, the war that I was in, um, which that puppet that we know as GWB uh, was doing at the behest of his globalist masters and of the Western satanic elites. He said that he was forming a coalition of the willing to disarm Saddam's regime. So, if you all recall that time, that was before the time that I deployed. I went to Iraq during the surge. The surge was roughly about 2007, 2008 time frame. So we were part of the surge forces. Third ACR was. So that was when we went in. But the point I'm making is that China and Russia, Xi Jinping and his best buddy, and he is his best friend. They both call each other their best friend. So Russia and China are a lot closer than people like to admit. But they're both fiercely independent nations. And one is the world superpower, the hegemon, which is China, and the other one is right behind them as the number two. In overall power, I'm stating. So, they Russia sends yes, Michael, he's just a puppet. He's nothing but a puppet. He was appeasing his bankster gangster masters of the Western satanic banking elites, which he is a willing participant in that clique. So, anyways, again, like I said in my last stream, the East has their own elites. They're not part of the Western system. Now, like the mafia, when two families have sit downs and business negotiations and business dealings, yes, that does happen. It has happened. But make no mistake about it. They are not, are not part of the same system. The Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc are two separate entities, like two competing mafia dynasties. They're both criminal syndicates. Like if we made a mafia comparison, but they're both their own entities. They're both with their own agendas, their own plans, conspiring against each other, motivated by greed, and they're both equally evil. In fact, I think the Eastern set might be even more evil if you look at their state of mind, because China, especially, is a secular humanist regime. And secular humanism totally shits on humanity. Secular humanism is anything that has an ism at the end of it. Fascism, Nazism, communism, socialism, the ism, as some like to call it. But secular humanism is what China is under. I mean, yeah, they might have their mixed economy now, but it's still secular humanism because the CCP runs that nation. And they are not part of the Western system. They've had business dealings with the Western system. They took advantage of the Western system, but make no mistake about it, they did that for personal gain, for gains for their nation. They didn't do it because they actually believe in the Western elites or their ideas or causes. No, they did it to take advantage. It's like a sociopath or a psychopath or a master manipulator. That's what happens between these rival cliques. They get greedy. They conspire against each other. They might share some of the same goals, sure. And to people at our level, it might look like they have a unified front. But overarching, overlapping goals does not mean that they're united. It just means that they might believe in some of the same things. But they're not united. They are not a united front. And in fact, there won't be any sort of united anything until the Antichrist comes into power and convinces them through flattery, because he has none of his own power. Keep that in mind. The Antichrist has no power of his own, but he attains his kingdom through flattery. And you can find that in the Bible. So how does he convince these 10 kings who have real power, real hard power? They have real militaries, real power, real resources, real assets. How does he convince them to go along with him? Through flattery. He doesn't attain his world regime on his own. He has his father, the devil, and his brother, the false prophet, helping him all the way through. So the Antichrist rises from obscurity and attains his kingdom through flattery because he has none of his own power. So keep that in mind. There's not like some Antichrist army, although some people claim there is, but it's not like that. He will do negotiations, he will make deals, and he will use false miracles before the kings of the earth to get them to agree to assist him in his lofty goals of a one world regime. But until that point, these elites, and that falls apart, by the way. It falls apart because they only reign for 1 hour with the beast before the world government actually begins collapsing and showing cracks. But anyways, so I said all that to say this. These elites are not unified at all. Don't ever believe that they are. They're not. This Great Reset thing is a purely Western concept. It is not something that affects China or Russia. They could give a shit less what we do to ourselves. In fact, it benefits them for us to weaken ourselves, for these stupid, idiotic Western elites to burn down their own power base so that we can be easily invaded and colonized. China's Wei Fang, the defense minister who runs the entire Chi-Com armed forces and paramilitary, he has made it abundantly clear in his speech to the Politburo what his plans are for America. So, these Western elites, in weakening the U.S. and weakening Germany, France, Britain, Italy, all those European NATO allies too, in weakening their own bloc, they are losing chips on the proverbial table. They won't have any sort of chips left on the table. They will have no power. They will have nothing. And China and Russia and their allies like Belarus, Pakistan, Iran, and perhaps even India might join, because India has always been a traditional ally of Russia. Not so much China, but Russia is mediating. They are playing the role of mediator between India and China because they don't want any infighting in a united Eurasian Eastern Bloc. So, yes. But back to China. They are the hegemon in basically every category. And one way through cunning, through stealth, that they've dominated much of the world was through the whole Belt and Road Initiative. People overlook that so often. People don't. Hey, Blue Eyes, I see you there. These chats come and go. It's hard to see who's in there and who isn't. Hey, Desert Star. Hey, Jennifer, my dear. How are you? Who else is in here? Oh, hey, Watchman. Hey, Michael. Hey, everybody. But anyway, hey, Yeshua's coming. I know you're in here, too. You got to be in here. I didn't see you, but I'm sure you're here. This phone's a piece of garbage. But anyway, I just wanted to make it known that while the West burned itself down, China was making inroads in many nations with their Belt and Road Initiative. Well, there's a lot of things to the Belt and Road. It's not a real like cut and dry sort of a thing, but what it is China used trade. They used their industrial and economic might to conquer much of the world through stealth. Because what they did was they did all these infrastructure projects in other nations. They gave out loans to other nations. And while we were fighting failing counterinsurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan, which ultimately both failed because now Iraq is firmly in Iran's hands and Syria's hands, because Syria and Iran are also thick as thieves, and they both are in that Sino-Russian bloc too. While we were fighting those losing counterinsurgencies, and while we fled Afghanistan in disgrace, I mean, it was disgraceful how we left. We could have done that a lot more gracefully, but we fled like a bunch of cowards. Yeah, while that happened, China made inroads even into Afghanistan. They made inroads in countries in North and South America. So basically, they dominated through loans, through their economic and industrial prowess, and and countries that would default on loans, China now gets to dictate their domestic policies for them because that's a condition of not paying back the loans. So, China is doing the type of things that we used to do, but they're doing it through tradecraft, through economic means, and through soft military persuasion. Because yes, China has troops in Africa. They have a base in Djibouti, which is also where we and several other nations have bases. That's basically Djibouti's whole entire economy is leasing land out for military bases. Our actual base there is within 1 mile of the Chinese base. So when there is an invasion of the United States or even a larger war like World War III, which United States invasion I firmly believe is a big part of, yeah, there will definitely be battles erupting in parts of the world that people can't even think about or fathom, because it's not on most people's minds, because they don't know how extensive that these foreign forces are in other parts of the world. They don't know that China and Russia have a lot of bases and around different parts of the world. Sure, it's not as many as we have, but they don't want to overextend themselves, and they're very strategic and very austere how they place, where they place, and how they place these forces. They're very austere. The whole Eastern mindset is one of austerity. They're very, very frugal minded. They're very cautious, very careful, very, very deliberate in their planning. Whereas we're a lot more haphazard in the West, and we've overextended ourselves. And while our enemies did not, and they put their installations in very strategic parts of the world, China alone, back to China alone, through their civil military fusion policy, is essentially at a point to where any civilian infrastructure they have in any part of the world can be converted for military use, as I explained in the last stream. Ports become naval bases. Homes and apartment blocks that they own can become barracks. Farms can be forward operating bases or storage depots. Same with cargo yards, self-storage places. Old shopping malls or strip malls that they bought up can become bases. I mean, there's all sorts of places, warehouses, old abandoned factories that they bought up. They can store whole units worth of their equipment, their vehicles, their logistics in any of these. Yeah, it's okay, baby. You can be late. But anyways, yeah, they basically have all of these facilities that can readily become military bases as per their civil military fusion policy. And how does that fit into Belt and Road and their domination of these other nations? Well, they built up these other nations. They gave out loans to these other nations. And now these other nations have to do everything at China's behest because they owe China. And how would that play into an American invasion? Well, I mean, you have Mexico, you have Canada. Uh, I'm sure you guys are fully aware of what roles they play in all this. So much so is Canada in bed with China now because of their leaders selling them out that China has established legal military bases. I've showed you all footage of Chinese troops in their uniforms doing PT, doing a road march like what we used to do in the army. Yeshua's Coming channel. If you're in here, tell them about the PT road marches. How we used to march wearing our gear sometimes, or sometimes not. Sometimes we would go running in our uniforms or march in our uniforms. Well, that's what these Chi-Coms were doing on Salt Spring Island. There's a base there, a Chinese base. I mean, they're not coming right out and saying that they have bases, but it's well understood that they're there and they have legal military bases. Also, over London, Ontario, that is where the PLAAF planes and pilots casually fly over Canadian skies. I have showed you all that in the past. So the PLAN, the Chinese Navy, has a presence there in the new ports that are being constructed in British Columbia. Yes, they do. So the Chi-Com military, and surely their PAP, their paramilitary, their brutal Waffen-SS style unit, is up there as well. They have a presence up there. Nobody knows quite how big it is, but we can obviously infer and make educated guesses as that it is of a size necessary for an invasion of the United States, along with all the Trojan shock armies that are inside this nation, all the bad actors, like your fifth column, and the proxies they control and cultivated, and so on and so forth. So if you paid attention to 96-Hour Invasion, my documentary series, my 36 videos, I hope they don't take me down for saying this because they always take my comments down. Whenever I mention this on other channels, they do not want people finding out about it because it's about as close to the real plans as you can get. I mean, minus some really really minuscule items, like maybe in my hypothetical, I put a certain unit in a place that they're not going to be. Maybe that'll be another unit in that place. But that's about as close to the reality as it gets. By that I mean, like, say I put the 95th Group Army in a certain region. Well, maybe that's a different Group Army. Maybe it's not the 95th. Maybe the 95th is in another area. You know what I'm saying. It's basically as close to the reality as you could ever get. It's 36 videos, okay? And the more they go on, the more detailed they get, where I even break it down so small to where you see battalion levels. You see, the very first ones are very, rudimentary, very, very, kind of rough as far as, the maps go, but it gets better as it goes because I put more color coding, more details. I break units down. I show you where they move, who they go up against, how they destroy them. I read a scenario script that I have to write out. It took me a lot of work to make those. It's not something I could just have gotten up and done. I literally had to basically put all this time and effort and research, and then I had to compile it into a scenario script of what I knew about their hybrid war doctrines. Then I had to place the units. Then I had to place our stuff, our units, which we have, like our real units. Then I had to have their real units go up against our real units, and I had to have them doing different types of maneuvers and using different equipment and so on and so forth. And it was so hard keeping track of that stuff during the making of those that sometimes I would accidentally call a battalion a company or a division, but it was a battalion. But I would slip up and say it because there were so many things going on, and it was extremely hard to multitask while I made those. I had to hold a camera, read a script, and I had to show the movements on the map and everything else. It was difficult. I had to make the maps too. It took a long time to compile all of that for everybody, but I basically taught a college course on this stuff, for a lack of a better way of putting it. I mean, so essentially what you have is the same thing as I showed in those maps is how it'll go down here. Only those maps were a best case scenario, a best case, like literally taking the pace of life as we have now, where it's relatively calm, and then just throwing an invasion scenario into it. And we still lost. We still lost horribly because we're outnumbered, we're outgunned, we're out-teched with high technology. Cyber and anti-satellite weapons crippled our grid and comms and took everything down. And of course, they have EMPs too, but I don't think they'll use those because they want the infrastructure as intact as it can be. Because if they do an EMP, then they'll have to put all new wiring and transformers and everything else in. And I'm not sure they want to do that. So I'm thinking they would do a cyber, but have an EMP as a backup option if they really had to. But what I'm saying is this. They would take down we have become so dependent on technology. They would remove the GPS that our military depends on. They would remove all their networks of communication with cyber because they hack solar winds too, so they can shut our nuke arsenal down because you have high-level officers in the armed forces, our armed forces, coming out and saying that our nuke arsenal could be compromised. So what does that tell you? They're admitting it. And they're saying that they don't even know that it could be. Well, I would put money on that it is, because you don't hack something like that without an intent behind it. And the intent behind that would be to learn everything they could learn about how our networks function so that they could go in there and shut it off like a light switch. Same with the electronic warfare capabilities that both China and Russia possess. They've both demonstrated how effective those are. The Chinese on the Spratlys against in the South China Sea against our F-35s, and the Russians on 2 occasions against the same ship. First time, I believe, was an Su-24 with those the Murmansk-style jamming pods on them, which turned an older aircraft like that into a lethal killing machine, because if they can shut down a whole ship, then they can definitely drop torpedoes in, or they can do a precision strike onto a ship while its defense systems are down. So this, and another time with an Su-24. That happened in 2014 and again in early 2021. So basically, with the F-35 situation and the ship situation, that's like saying that Russia and China can both shut down our whole Navy, and then they can use their carrier killer and or hypersonics and or regular shore-based anti-ship missiles to basically down everything. Oh, and air defense missiles for any sort of naval aviation. But, yeah, I just wanted to make that well understood. Now, with Chinese war industry, there are several major manufacturers. I already told you about Norinco, the China North Group Industries, which has 300 huge factories that just belch out tanks and APCs and armaments and shells and whatever else. There's also the GSGC, which is the China South Industries. They also have a very large number of major factories. I'm not even counting small ones like the cottage industry ones that we still have left. We don't have, but just barely over a dozen major armaments factories. We have like one tank factory in Lima, Ohio, while China has many. China has a freakish number of tanks, and a lot of them are even in storage. They upgraded all their old designs. While our military did much the same, we're still using a majority of items from the 80s and early 90s. We are. We're even still using some 70s era platforms. Our what do they call those? Minuteman 3s, that's what it was. Slipped my mind for a second, sorry. Those Minuteman 3 ICBMs that are silo-based, those are very old. And like I said in the last platform, I wouldn't be surprised if many of them didn't work properly. Because things do go out of date if they're not properly maintained. And if you're using an older system especially, and older warheads that haven't all been replaced, yes, they've replaced some, but there's a chance that things can go wrong. The Trident missiles that we have, we only have about like 240 something Tridents out at sea at any given time. I mean, and those missiles can be nuclear or they can be conventionally armed. So, not all of them are nuclear tipped anyway, because we're only allowed to deploy a certain amount of nuclear arms as per treaty. Basically, China has 1,000, like I told you, and the exact numbers of the fissile material that they've had to produce up to upwards of 1,000 would be 2 to 4 tons of plutonium and a humongous stockpile of uranium at a weapons grade at about 18 to 20 tons. That's a big enough stockpile of fissile material for them to have at least 1,000. Some people have estimated 12, or some even estimate it's far less than 1,000. But I like 400. I've seen as a low ball, but I'm going to go with a high median. The high median number would be 1,000. I'm not going to believe that they have 1,200 because they just don't have that much fissile material in my estimation. But they do definitely have enough for 1,000. And we only have less than 2,000 warheads deployed. So really, there's almost a complete nuclear parity with China at this point, because if they have 1,000 and they're all deployed and they have much more advanced missiles than we do now. In fact, in that category, I was reading up more on the FOBS system last night, the fractional orbital bombardment system. That thing that China tested, where it flew around the world, and it was very, very accurate for a first test of something that flew entirely around the world. What it was is they launched it was the 77th or 78th launch of the Long March rocket. They have these, they call their rockets Long March something, that's what they call them. So they launched this Long March rocket. It was their 77th or 78th rocket launch. And what this thing did was it then deployed a hypersonic glide vehicle that circumnavigated the world, okay? Whether you believe the world is flat or whatever, like I tend to go with that. I mean, I don't know the exact shape of the world. I've never been high enough to see what the world's shape is, but I don't believe it's a sphere, not for one moment. But this glide vehicle, even if it was flat, it still circumnavigated the world in a circle, and it hit in less than a dozen miles of its target. So if we're talking about a 3.3 megaton warhead on one of these things, I think it might be a little lighter, but still, even if it was a 1 megaton warhead, because China has the 3.3 megaton warheads, which are technically thermonuclear devices, because they have such a high yield. We've tested 15 megaton, like in the Castle Bravo tests back in the 50s. And Russia, of course, had their Tsar Bomba. Well, the Soviet Union. It wasn't Russia back then. It was the Soviet Union. They had their Tsar Bomba test, which was they wanted it to be a 100 megaton test, but that would have been so big it would have killed the pilots. And the 51 megatons that it was such a humongous blast. 600 miles away in Karelia, which is that northern peninsula of Russia where or not Karelia, I'm sorry, the Kola Peninsula, where just in that Murmansk area, the Kola Peninsula goes out into like a sort of jutting peninsula out from the Murmansk area. It sort of juts like southeastward. Well, it shattered windows all those miles away, some 600 miles away. That Tsar Bomba test shattered windows, okay? There's people that live there that all could testify to that. So, China's 3.3, while still pretty damn big, it's not as big as other weapons that have been tested. But my point is, I go back to the original point. Even if it was under a dozen miles, even if it was 6 miles, if you're carrying a huge warhead, it really doesn't matter about accuracy because you're basically going to annihilate everything anyway, easily within an 8 to 12 mile radius anyhow. So if your target is anywhere in that radius, it's gone. It's gone. And that hypersonic glide vehicle, we already know hypersonics. There's no defense against them. I had to chastise people that tried to say that there's lasers that can shoot them down. No, there's not, because that object is moving so fast that there's no way there could be a target acquisitioning radar that would catch it in time, and you would need a quantum supercomputer to calculate all the possible maneuvers it would make, because these things don't fly in a straight pattern. That's what people don't understand. These things are maneuvering. They can conduct random maneuvers at such a high rate of speed that they're impossible to shoot down. Okay? There's no laser on this earth. The lasers we do have are made for subsonic targets. Subsonic, like drones and slow cruise missiles. But, Russia's workhorse, the Caliber cruise missile, is capable of going supersonic speeds. Not hypersonic, but supersonic. It's capable of breaking the sound barrier. Our Tomahawk, on the other hand, is subsonic. It moves fairly slow for what it is. I mean, it can get the job done, but mostly when you're at war with like a third world nation that can't really put up much of a defense against it. But when you're going up against a top tier power like Russia or the world superpower China, those Tomahawks ain't gonna do shit. I'm sorry, but they're not. I mean, you would literally have to like basically launch your entire arsenal of Tomahawks in order to for some of them to get through. Because, China has means by which they can scramble these missiles. Their electronic warfare, as is Russia's, is so top-notch. They can scramble missiles just like they scramble planes and their avionics. It's not inconceivable to imagine that a missile with a much more primitive guidance system can be scrambled and go off target. So, yes, we are quite a ways behind. I think we were supposed to have a replacement for the Tomahawk, but I'm still not finding much on that yet. As far as I know, we have at our highest estimate about 4,000 Tomahawks, but I already told you guys in those videos about Chinese and about Russian missiles that they have vastly more missiles than we do in the ballistic category and in the cruise missile categories. Both of them do. The actual Russian large missile numbers, like cruise and especially ballistic, are like a state secret. They don't readily put things out. So you have to go off of what available information there is to even essentially ascertain and get an educated, proper guess as to how many they could have, because they certainly have missiles by which they can reload on these TEL systems, these trucks, these missile trucks, these mobile platforms, the launchers. They have reloadable cruise missiles. It's not like they have like a really small amount, and once they've fired them, it's gone. I mean, just in Ukraine so far, they have already fired 700 conventional missiles. They wouldn't have fired that many if they had an issue with missiles. It's a limited incursion. And we fired 802 on Iraq in 2003 in the invasion phase. I just thought y'all might want to know that. I have it all wrote down here. And since 1986, let me see, roughly 22,000 caliber cruise missiles have been produced since then. But Russia has exported a lot of those to other nations. Russia is the second biggest arms exporting nation, while we are the first, which is foolish of us because we don't have a very big stockpile in the first place. And now we're just giving it away to places that we shouldn't even be giving it to, stirring the pot. So, yeah, I would say that Russia is right behind China in the number of large missiles, because China has the biggest missile force, land-based missile force on the planet. The Strategic Rocket Forces, which is a branch of the regular Chinese armed forces with the PLA, the PLAN, and the PLAAF, the Strategic Missile or Rocket Forces, however you'd like to call them, it's the same thing. They have a humongous quantity of missiles, like I told you all in that video. They're more forthcoming with the amount of missiles they have than even Russia is. And they have the biggest arsenal on Earth of land-based missile systems. That's cruise and strategic or tactical ballistic missiles. All the way from short range to medium range to intermediate to long range. And that's in the ballistic category. Then in the cruise missile category, They have more land-based cruise missiles than anybody else, and they also have a hell of a lot of sea-based cruise missiles, and they have plenty of air-based, what you call standoff cruise missiles that they can launch from their bombers. So yeah, China is humongous, and just what all the equipment they have in storage. Now, getting back to China, like I intended to, I tend to get off topic, and I'm sorry for that, but I wanted to make everybody aware. They have the biggest combat air fleet on Earth. Combat planes. I'm not talking about overall Air Force, although they do have a decent amount of cargo, transport, and other types of aircraft, fuelers and such. But because of our Air Mobility Command, we have a very large Air Mob Command. Our Air Mobility Command is huge. It is about, it takes up a large number of our actual Air Force numbers. But in combat aircraft, we only have close to 1,800. Russia outnumbers us in combat aircraft with 1931. When you add their fighters, fighter bombers, and strategic, and I'm including their storage numbers because they keep a lot of their aircraft and helicopters fairly well maintained, the ones that they don't have like up in frontline service. Russia stores things too, but they do it a little different than China. Instead of necessarily passing all of it down like China does, because China's forces are massive, gargantuan, Russia tends to store certain things away, but keep them maintained, much like China does. But China passes theirs down to the units who do it, but Russia keeps theirs in special facilities for keep them in a state of readiness to where all they need is fluids and basic maintenance checks and services for the reserve units that they call up to operate these. So when you combine Russia's like 1360 odd fighters and fighter bombers and their 571 strategic bombers, most of those are Tu-22s. They have some new T-160s, but there's not very many of those yet. But those are a supersonic, very fast-moving strategic bomber with all new avionics, all new, very advanced systems in them for targeting and precision munitions that go with the systems, everything else. You have Russia has a big combat air fleet, very big, but China, back to them, they have 2,150 fighters and fighter bombers, and an additional 300 tactical fighter bombers in storage of the Nanchang Q5 variety. So really, if you add the storage numbers, China has about 3,450 if you add the other 300. And then they have 242 strategic bombers, your HK-6 bombers. So in total combat aircraft, without the additional 300 that are stored, they have 2,392 combat aircraft when you combine their strategic, their fighters, and their fighter bombers. But then when you add the other 300, it's 2,692. That's almost 2,700 planes. They outnumber us by almost 1,000 planes when you add that other 300 to it. And Russia outnumbers us by around maybe about 100 or so, 120 or so, something like this. I'd have to crunch the numbers on paper, and I'm talking, and I don't have time. But the one area we're strong in is attack helicopters. We have 3,400 attack helicopters. 2,400 of those, as of 2020, are Apaches. And the other 1,000 are like your Cobras, your Super Cobras, things like that. But Russia has a lot of helicopters too, both attack and other category like transport and utility helicopters. But Russia has 1,655. But China has produced so many helicopters in just this year that their numbers of helicopters, of attack helicopters, went up by over 100. They initially had 350 just a few years ago. Now they're sitting at 510. So it went up incrementally to where now this year they have 510, up from 350 originally. And then they have 1,000 other category helicopters, like their Z-20 utilities and other helicopters. I even itemized it down to specific numbers of specific helicopters, but I don't want to bore you all to death with the numbers. I'm just going to strictly talk about China and their Belt and Road and their grandiose plans for colonizing the United States and taking the rump of Canada, the southern part, while Russia will get the Alaska back in the northern part. But they will lead a coalition of the willing, back to where I originally began. They will lead a coalition of the willing to disarm the United States. Like George Bush said about Iraq, I can see Xi Jinping saying that in Beijing about the United States. On my order, I order invasion of United States. I mean, I literally could see something like that happening, or even Vladimir saying it. I could see them saying it. I mean, there's a lot of palace intrigue going on about Putin right now, whether he's ill or not. Look, I don't want to speculate on that because there's no real solid concrete proof one way or the other. I mean, sure, he sort of looks not in his best health, but nobody can really say 100% what is going on with that man. Nobody really knows. But even if he's gone and Medvedev were to take over again, Medvedev is a war hawk. He is a war hawk. That man wants to crush NATO and the United States. And, let's talk about, I told you about how massive the Chinese air fleet is, the combat air fleet they have. Now let's talk about their Navy. China has the most advanced, up-to-date, and biggest Navy, just like they have the most advanced, up-to-date, biggest combat air fleet. Chinese Navy has 355 modern war vessels, modern combat vessels, and they have 200 additional auxiliary ships. And I'm not even counting what their paramilitary marine militia has, who can press into service any civilian ship they want, as well as having additional ships that were passed down from the Navy to them. Because they're sort of like a paramilitary mix of the Coast Guard and the Marine Corps reserves. If I could make a comparison of what the Chinese paramilitary marine militia is, it's like mixing the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. So they're basically a home defense force for China, but they've also been aggressive because they've also threatened the Philippines with their marine militia. Now, let's be real. The Philippines can easily be taken by Chinese paramilitary like the Marine militia. The Philippines does not have a big military at all, or a very modern military. The Marine militia could just basically overrun that place. So yeah, I take that as a threat. All the belligerent behavior that China's been doing as of lately, in their part of the world, but in others, because again, China is all over the world. They're in Africa. China is heavily influencing how things are now in South America, like Ecuador and Bolivia, and all these other nations, Venezuela too. Venezuela is heavily under Chinese, but also Russian influence. Both China and Russia have forces and bases in Venezuela. That's why Venezuela, the USA cannot deal with them. They tried to with some sort of a covert operation using mercs, but that failed because the USA can't do it in an official capacity, because if we did it in any sort of official capacity, we would immediately be at war with not only Venezuela, but we would be at war with China and Russia, who have bases and forces there. It was intelligence from China and Russia that got that operation to be a failure. And if we would have gotten involved officially, you could best believe those Chinese and Russian troops would be coming out of their bases to assist the Venezuelan armed forces in repelling any sort of invasion attempt. Russia has heavy strategic bombers there. China has equipment and troops there, and missiles. They also have a joint Sino-Russian base in Cuba. So Yeah, Cuba is going to be a springboard for an invasion of the American Southeast. Like I showed you in my Florida map, how a big Chinese and big Russian force, along with parts of the Cuban Revolutionary Army and a little bit of their small navy and their small air forces, participated there too. It'll be a multinational invasion, but all these smaller countries involved are just going to be seen as like filler units. I mean, they're not going to take the key role. Let's face it, but they will be involved in different capacities. Like Pakistan, like North Korea, like Cuba, like Belarus, like Iran, like Syria. They'll all be involved in different capacities, but they're not going to be the main forces. I mean, there is going to be many regional conflicts going on in World War III that lead up to it. So when America is rapidly conquered, there will be foreign expeditionary troops, sort of like when we invaded Iraq. We had a foreign expeditionary force from Australia, from Britain. I mean, there were foreign allies helping us. So when China and Russia both lead a coalition of the willing to disarm the United States, they'll have their own broad coalition of allies put together. But China has a lot of coercive power because I said their Belt and Road Initiative has put a lot of nations at the mercy of China. They have to obey China. I'll just put it this way: all the major Chinese allies owe China for even existing, because China has bailed out militarily not just North Korea, like I told you last time, but also Pakistan, and there's others too. Like they even helped Vietnam before they invaded Vietnam. Now, say what you want about the Chinese invasion of Vietnam in 1979, after we left, long after we left Vietnam. Say what you want about it, but you know, even though it was a Pyrrhic victory for China, and they did achieve their objectives, all they said they wanted to do was do a punitive, limited incursion on Vietnam, and they did do that. It wasn't no full-scale invasion, sort of like what Russia's doing to Ukraine. It was a punitive, limited incursion with a goal of showing Vietnam that nobody can protect them. That China runs things in that neighborhood, and they did do that. They did do that because Vietnam was meddling at the time in Cambodia, and China didn't like that because at the time China was supporting the Khmer Rouge, the Khmer Rouge of Pol Pot and his regime, which is one of the worst regimes in all of human history. What they did to their own people is just disgusting, and I won't go into it. But just learn about S-21 prison and some of those other places. It'll disgust you too. But China was supporting them. And Vietnam went in there to liberate the Cambodian people from Pol Pot. And China got livid about it, and they did a limited incursion on North Vietnam to open the road to Hanoi, to show the Vietnamese that nobody can protect them, and they did do that. Even though it was a Pyrrhic victory, the Vietnamese put up a good fight. They had help from the USSR at the time, who didn't help officially in a military capacity, but what they did do is they conducted airlifts of Vietnamese troops from both southern Vietnam and also from Cambodia, and airlifted them to the north of Vietnam. Vietnam is a very long country. If you put Vietnam on a map, from the southern tip of it to the very northern tip of it, it's almost as long as the eastern United States is from north to south. Like, let's say from Michigan all the way down to Louisiana. It's almost that long. It is a very long but narrow country. Anyways, back to what I was saying. A lot of nations owe China for their existence. And, when people anger China can do a lot of damage, especially now that they have all these other nations under their yoke with this Belt and Road thing. Chinese troops have infiltrated many nations. They're in Australia. They're in New Zealand. They're even officially in Canada in uniform. They're also in Mexico. They're in South America. They're in Africa. China is everywhere. whether they conceal their involvement or whether they do it openly, they are everywhere. I mean, my goodness, man. I mean, they've got a huge enough military to where they and paramilitary to where they can put forces all over the world. It's not hard. I mean, and I mean they can do so much with what they have. But back to their navy. I got off on a tangent again, you guys. I'm so sorry. I think the fact that I'm going for 2 hours tonight is ringing in my head, and I'm excited about it. So I just try to cover everything I can. But anyway, let's go back to their navy. I got off on a tangent when I started talking about their additional paramilitary of their marine militia, but back to their navy. Their navy is the most modernized, biggest navy in the world. They already have 4 aircraft carriers. You know, they try to say 2 are under construction, but they're for all intents and purposes, they're essentially finished already. They're just waiting for maybe some computer installations and things like that. But, you know, they have 4 aircraft carriers, but the age of the aircraft carrier is obsolete anyway because of the types of missiles, the types of electronic warfare, the types of things that exist now. There are make aircraft carriers obsolete in terms of power projection. You can no longer really use an aircraft carrier for power projection, not in the way we try to. Instead, the Chinese naval doctrine of aircraft carriers is to push out their defenses further from their coast, sort of like what they did with their man-made islands in the Spratlys. Well, that gives them an additional place where they can put electronic warfare assets, where they can put air defense missiles, and where they can put anti-ship and also ballistic missiles and airstrips for their air force or even their naval aviation. China actually has a very sizable naval aviation corps. I mean, they have 440 aircraft that are just part of their navy, not their air force. Their air force is huge. And I'm talking about their combat planes. They have a huge combat air force, and they have enough support planes, transports, and fuelers and such to where their combat air force can operate very far from home. If it were to fly from Chinese territory, they can operate very far out into the Pacific if they're operating from their own territory. Because they have enough fuelers to where they can sustain long flying missions. And of course, they can put extra fuel tanks on planes, like we saw how the Russians did, flying planes from the Russian Far East, the Russian Pacific Far East. They flew planes on a exercise all the way to Hawaii. All the way to Hawaii. They didn't use no aircraft carriers. They flew MiG-31 Foxbats with extra fuel tanks all the way to Hawaii and back all the way to the Russian Far East. So when they accompanied those naval vessels, they already had a huge fuel capacity because they carried their extra drop tanks and they were able to go an extremely long range. So it's not like, you know, the old days, the World War II days, where you didn't have to worry about prop planes flying across the Atlantic or the Pacific. For all intents and purposes, with the mid-air refueling, with the extra tanks, jets can go a lot further than prop planes ever could. And not only that, but the Chinese and Russians, again, have bases in Cuba. They have bases in Venezuela. The Chinese own, essentially, the Panama Canal Zone. They have bases in the Bahamas. They have tons of bases inside the United States, according to their civil military fusion policy, and all the property they own here they do. They're just in stealth mode. They're in stealth mode right now. All their vehicles, all their logistics, all their stuff is just sitting idle, waiting for the signal. As are the externals in both Canada and Mexico, and also in Cuba and Bahamas and everywhere else for that matter. But anyway, planes don't have to fly across the Atlantic or across the Pacific. They're already in North and South America on their bases, okay? I don't know why people have this closed-minded World War II mentality. It's not World War II anymore. People always think that were fighting the last war, like the French against the Germans. They thought that World War II would be second generation warfare, which is trench warfare, but then it became third generation warfare, which is blitzkrieg. Fourth generation warfare, or hybrid warfare, is mixing blitzkrieg with the Trojan horse concept. And China, but also Russia, but mainly China, is the pioneer of that concept. Okay? So when we get invaded, there will be no such thing as a front line. Front lines will be untenable. They will be unworkable. You can't have a front line when you're getting hit from inside and out. All it'll be is where the troops are at any given time. Like, say you have a Chinese unit that begins in a warehouse. It could be a tank battalion. They come out of some Chi-Com CCP-owned warehouse in America in some city. So wherever they are is where they are. There's no front line. There's not a safe place behind any sort of front line where people can organize a draft or they can, think about it. When you have enemy units all over the inside of your country, how are you going to do these things? It's impossible. You can't do that because cities will be captured so fast, so rapidly, as will infrastructure and key invasion routes by the Trojans, who will set up resupply depots along those routes on other CCP regime properties, for the externals, of course, and also for other Trojans that are moving around, shuffling around inside the country. You're literally going to have foreign troops coming out of every nook, cranny, and crevice. Every nook, cranny, and crevice. They're going to be going to their muster and assembly points, just like when I wrote my community tab stories, just like I showed you on my maps and my documentaries, 96-Hour Invasion, and also the Pacific Northwest one. They're going to be going to their assembly and muster points. They're going to hold their formations. Certain things are going to happen, like the power goes out, the grid goes down, no running water, no electric, no telecom, no internet. The anti-satellite weapons are going to knock down America's eyes and ears. And then all these assembled Trojan horse shock units of the PLA, PAP, maybe the National Militia too, Chi-Com reserves of all sorts, and Russian army, and so on and so forth. They're all going to pour out of Chinese CCP regime-owned properties. They are going to race into the cities. Many will start already in some of the cities. They will race from the countryside, from inside the cities, and they will go for key objectives. They will capture TV stations, even though the power's out. They want all these things for strategic reasons. They're going to capture TV stations. They're going to capture gov buildings, regime buildings of ours. They're going to capture. I showed you all that in my second story when they took the state cap of Arizona and Phoenix. They climbed in the windows. I showed you all in my review playlist how those tactics work, those building tactics. But anyway, back to this. They're going to storm all major buildings. They're going to set up checkpoints and choke points. They're going to use a hammer and anvil type maneuver where one unit circles ahead and pincers ahead while another pushes on through until they meet the other unit, and then they go through whole neighborhoods like that. I have prime examples of that in my documentaries. If you should ever want to learn what I'm talking about, go and watch those. I show you every conceivable tactical type of maneuver in the book. A lot of it's basic stuff, but it's stuff that will be common. It'll be common. So when you have shock troops using grappling hooks, climbing to second and third story windows, storming buildings, APCs and IFVs and tanks breaking down barriers of certain places and racing on in, sort of like they did at the end of the Vietnam War to the presidential palace. They just broke on through with their tank, and troops ran in after it and just stormed the place. The Chinese prepare for urban combat all the time. They even have a mock-up of Taipei, of their regime quarter in Taipei, the presidential palace in Taipei, and everything else. So it's not inconceivable to imagine them using that same template everywhere, including here. So when they begin to capture key buildings, police stations, regime buildings, installations, TV stations, grocery stores, warehouses, everything that they feel is strategically vital, power plants, just everything you can imagine, they are going to shock people, like literal shock forces. They're going to shock people to their core. When you see all these foreign vehicles and troops pouring out of nowhere and just capturing things, and there's nobody around to stop it, I mean, my God, who's going to stop something like that? Nobody's ready for it. Nobody. Civilians ain't going to know what's going on. They're not going to have actionable intel. They're just going to be sitting at home. The power's going to go out. They're not going to know what the hell's going on. They're not going to know where enemies are coming from. They're not going to know where they're going. They're not going to even know what to do about it, because one man or a few people is not going to take on a concentration of heavy forces, heavily equipped, heavily armed, with armored vehicles, artillery, air support. You're just not. You're not going to take all that stuff on. You're not going to be a one-man show. I hate to say it. Even a group of civilians that are armed are not going to be able to pull it off. Being reactionary will get you killed in such a thing. No, I showed you all in my stories, all the intelligent people, they evacuated. First they evacuated. Then they waited for the occupation forces to become comfy. They didn't act reactionary. They didn't run out in the middle of the invasion and get blown away. No, that's stupid. That's not going to do anything other than get you slaughtered. They evacuated the weak, the young, the elderly. They got them out into the woods, because let me tell you, in the invasion, primary and secondary types of objectives are going to be human settlements, like your cities and maybe some towns where they're strategically located. It's going to take a little while for them to get to every single solitary town, but major and minor and medium cities are going to be key priorities. And then you're going to have towns located along strategic routes and things like that. Then they're going to push out to tertiary type of places, like Broken Bow in my first story. Broken Bow was a tertiary place. America had capitulated and officially surrendered by the time Broken Bow was even discovered by Chi-Com recon forces in that story. Just the recon assets. And then the tank battalion moved in, and they're the ones that surrounded the town while the PAP companies cleared it. So, yeah, in that first story, I showed the difference between a tertiary location versus a primary location, like in the second story, like Phoenix. Phoenix is a major city. They're going to take those places immediately. There's not going to be any delay. So you're going to have these Trojan shock troops coming out of every nook, cranny, and crevice with all their vehicles, all their gear. They're going to be setting up logistical supply points on CCP properties along every major invasion route, so they can refuel their tanks, rearm them, give them more rounds, more equipment, and, more artillery shells if it's like howitzers or like an artillery battery or a rocket artillery battery, more rockets for them. They're going to have all this stuff. Fuel, POL products like lubricants for vehicles and extra vehicle parts. Everything you can imagine will be in these CCP properties so that they can keep their units moving. Because you can't fight a war without logistics. You're not going to fight a war without a way to resupply ammo, resupply fuel. If you don't have fuel, your vehicles are dead in the water. They run out. If you don't have ammo, you can't shoot. If you don't have food, your men don't perform like they should. They fall apart. They disintegrate. Units disintegrate under those conditions. And what we're doing to ourselves, what these elites are doing to us, rather, is criminal. These Western elites, they're setting us up against China, the most powerful nation on earth, and Russia, the second, and all their little allies like North Korea and Pakistan and Iran, Syria, Belarus, and maybe some of the other CSTO states, and, maybe even Serbia, others too. They're setting us up for a big fail. Well, what they think they're doing, these elites, they think, like I said before, they think they're pillaging everything and they're going to get all this wealth and that they're going to ride off into the sunset. But they're wrong. They're wrong. China hates them. China and Russia loathe them. They hate them. In fact, those people are going to be the most humiliated of all when they get caught. And they're going to be humiliated in front of everyone by the Chinese, by the Russians. The Eastern mindset, like I said before, is very austere compared to the Western mindset of oh, we have to always accumulate more and more and more and more and more and more. Well, China's more like, well, as we accumulate more, we're going to be very careful how we do things and how we spend it. That's austerity. I'm sorry, tongue twister. That is austerity at work as a mindset. They're very evil. They're very, very evil, but they are intelligent. I have to give them credit where it's true, where it's due. The Chinese and Russians are far more intelligent than these Western elites, and they're going to make examples of them all. They're going to put them to shame and embarrass and humiliate them in front of everybody. So, I'm saying back to, again, I got off on a tangent. So when you have this invasion going on, you have the Chi-Com Navy, and I go to the example of the French nuclear sub, the Sapphire, meaning sapphire in French, the Sapphire, which sunk an entire American carrier group. It was a nuclear-powered French attack sub back in 2015. There's other examples even earlier than this, but back in 2015, the Sapphire, a nuclear-powered attack sub, and an old one at that, a French attack sub, sunk an entire American carrier group single-handedly. So that showed the power of modern submarines in modern warfare. And that's even putting all the missiles aside. This is just talking about torpedoes. I'm not even talking about all the new anti-ship missiles, the new electronic warfare that's on Chinese naval vessels, the new computers, the new protection measures, all this stuff that are on all these Chinese vessels. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about what submarines can do. And China has increased their submarine fleet to large levels. They now have 70 submarines, and I'm talking about they're nearly caught. Or actually, they have more subs than we do. They outnumber us by, I believe, two submarines now. They have caught up to us in the last 20 years. Not only catching up to us in submarines, but the quality of their submarines has increased, and now they've surpassed us by 2. And they're still not done. They're still building. Like I told you, by 2022, the number of helicopters increased from 350. I'm talking attack helicopters, not the other category, which they have 1,000 other, and I'm sure they probably have more by this year. Like their reserves increased this year to 5 million from first 500,000 and then 1 million to 5 million as of 2022. They're getting ready for a huge war, a huge conventional war. Yeah, sure, some nukes will be used, but they want most of this place intact for colonization, for food. They want our food production capacity. They want the infrastructure, as much as of it that's salvageable. They want as much of this place intact, the resources, the space to colonize their people on it. They want as much of this place intact as possible, and to turn it all into a nuclear graveyard is untenable. I mean, they can use some nukes in certain places, and they will, but to turn the whole thing into an irradiated wasteland is untenable. It's illogical. It's irrational. They're not going to do that. They're not. There's conventional munitions that can do the types of damage that low-yield nukes do. Like these, and I'm talking about like a 2 or 3 kiloton nuke. These thermobaric weapons, these thermobarics, I'm not just talking about the rockets. I'm talking about the airdrop versions, the airdrop munitions, like sort of like the daisy cutters that can level basically an entire city block just single-handedly. The Russians have the KA-500, the KA-B-500, which they call the father of all bombs. And I'm sure they have other variants by now, too. But that thing is the first guided thermobaric with a camera mounted on it. And they have these things, and these things can destroy massive amounts of territory without leaving it an irradiated mess. So they can also lob salvo after salvo after salvo of thermobaric rockets off those systems that are built on those T-72 chassis I told you guys about in that video I did with my Russian blue cat, Porky. Yeah, they can lob salvos of those things and just totally annihilate whole square miles of areas, whole grid squares, multiple grid squares. Which a grid square on a military map is a 1 by 1 kilometer area. Kilometers, not miles, but they can still. But even so, a mile is a little bigger than a kilometer. They can saturate multiple square miles at a time with thermobaric rockets, or even these thermobaric munitions being dropped in a few different places at the same time. They don't need nukes, you guys. They do not need nukes. They can do exactly what nukes do with basically the same results. Oh, and by the way, if you're on the edge of an area where these thermobarics are used, it sucks the oxygen out of the air and it crushes organs. It crushes organs, okay? So those things are nothing to joke about. Those things are massive, the destructive potential. So China, of course, has these too. And again, yes, they will use some nukes where they feel it's necessary or it doesn't hinder their overarching objectives. They will use some, but they're not going to go absolutely, totally crazy with it. I mean, that's totally irrational thinking. That's illogical. It makes no sense. When you understand the mindset of these Eastern elites, like in the CCP regime, of these Russian political oligarchs, which they are an elite class unto themselves. They do not kowtow to the West. They might have business dealings with Western bankers and such, but they don't kowtow to them. They have their own systems, and their systems are built on real assets, real commodities, real military power. They are not tearing themselves down. Real industry, real products, real numbers, real economy. They don't have a fake economy built on paper and Ponzi schemes. They have a real economy. They have a real military that's not woke and sissified and wimpy and you know what I'm saying. But basically, I was getting at this. I was saying that they don't have to use nukes in this invasion. They can use a majority of conventional munitions and achieve the same level of destruction without having to worry about trying to rebuild inside of an irradiated wasteland. Because you're not going to rebuild a city right away if it's irradiated. You're going to have to wait, like with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You're going to have to give it some time. And they're not trying to waste time. The whole point of invading us is to get their operations going as quickly as possible, their colonization and everything else. They want the farmland. They want the resources. They're not going to make it irradiated and destroy it all, I mean, definitely not to where the soil becomes contaminated in the farms, And you know what I'm saying here. You understand exactly what I'm saying. It just makes no sense. So I'm just going to go on to say that hold on, my cat's sitting on my papers. Hold on. Get down, Romero. Go. All right, anyways, I'm saying that in this invasion, the majority of it will be conventional, and a very small amount of it will be nukes. With the types of electronic and cyber and hypersonic weapons and other secret weapons, DEW weapons, directed energy weapons that both China and Russia have, they don't have to use a majority of nukes. They have other things. Hypersonics can be conventionally equipped, like what the Russians did with that Kinzhal to that bunker beneath 30 meters of granite. That concrete reinforced bunker in Ukraine under 30 meters of granite and concrete reinforced. That Kinzhal went right through there and destroyed it. It was a conventional warhead, too. They don't need nukes on their hypersonics. They can easily switch to a very potent hypersonic. Hypersonic. On their hypersonics, they can easily equip a very potent warhead. But the Chi-Com Navy, the most modern, most advanced, most well-equipped in the world due to the electronic warfare, the new systems on them with the targeting, acquisition computers, the types of weapons that they now have on them, the types of doctrines they use, everything, the way they use their aircraft carriers, the types of planes they have on their aircraft carriers, which are all very, very modern, very up-to-date, very advanced aircraft. They are ahead of us in the naval game, and Russia contributes another 290 plus ships. I would say it's probably in the realm of like 293 or 294, but the closest I can get is 290 plus. So I can't recall the exact number. I didn't write that down, but I recall it being 290 plus. So it's like just a little over 290 vessels. And China, combining their 355 and 200 ships, their 200 auxiliary ships, is 555 ships. We have 490, but that's everything. That's including our reserves, our naval reserves, and everything. That's the whole fleet. So China has about 65 more vessels than we do. And Russia, if you throw them in, they're 290 plus, and you add that to China's 555, you get in excess of about 800 vessels, or a little over 800. And that's not even including the Chinese Marine Militia paramilitary, and that's also not including our Coast Guard either, but that's sort of like the same status as the Marine Militia of China. But as far as the number of ships, the American fleet is going to be outnumbered everywhere, because then when you throw in the North Koreans, who also have a pretty sizable sub-fleet for a country of their size, you throw in the Iranian Navy, you throw in all these other navies, yeah, we're vastly outnumbered. There's no chance. And in combat aircraft, we don't stand a chance, because China alone outnumbers us in combat aircraft by a huge gap. And Russia outnumbers us by a little bit, but the one thing that they have a lot more of us is we have our little 156, 157 bomber fleet in that ballpark. It's like 156 or 157. And Russia has 571 bombers, and that's everything they have that's already active and also in their navy and also in storage. So, yeah, they have the biggest bomber fleet of strategic bombers, but like the second or third biggest, no, it's just the second, or I'm sorry, it's the third biggest combat air fleet of fighters and fighter bombers after ours, right after ours. But when you add their strategic bombers, their huge fleet of strategic bombers, which drastically outnumbers our strategic bomber fleet, they end up having about 120 or so more combat aircraft than we have. So, but China just outnumbers us in every category. There's no category that we even come close to them, and the level of their tech is improved. So, what China tends to do, although they're not a big arms exporter, what they do is they produce the most arms in the world. They produce the most steel in the world, bigger than the next 20 nations combined. They produce more ships, more tanks, more planes than anyone in the world. Right now, they do. And they have for the last 5 or so odd years. Their production has ramped up a lot. They have been some factory building fools. And they really started this new modernization campaign towards the end of the 90s. And now they got to parity with us, to equal us. As we were declining, they were ascending, and they met us at the nexus point, which was about 2017, 2018. And now, 5 years after that, they surpass us to such an extreme that we lose every single solitary war simulation to China. Every one of them. We also lose to Russia. Exercises and simulations. So, all of that being said, yeah, we don't even come close to China in anything, except for helicopters where we surpass them for now. Because China didn't put a lot of resources into helicopters for some reason until recently. But what China did focus on was countermeasures, was short, medium, and long-range air defense artillery. They can swat down any attack helicopter we put in the air with impunity. So, I mean, I guess I understand, they use different doctrines than we do. So I understand why they were very missile heavy and very heavy vehicle heavy, as we tried to scale back and get more into lighter armored vehicles like the Strykers and things like that, where we started getting rid of our tanks. The Marine Corps got rid of all its tanks. They put off 400 of their tanks in storage. So while we go light, they're going heavy, extremely heavy. China has 12,000 active tanks and another 8,000 tanks in storage. 8,000 in storage. It's similar to the Russian storage numbers, but Russia's storage numbers are more in boneyards. China's storage numbers are for their paramilitary and these humongous reserves they've brought up in the last year or so. These 5 million reserves. So China, all in all, has about 20,000 tanks. And the number astounded me. I literally had to go through every make and model of Chinese tank to make sure that that wasn't some fantastical number. It's not only possible, it's reality. Because when you look at every series of Chinese tank, even since the 50s and on, and especially now at the rate they're producing and churning out tanks, and I'm talking about brand new tanks, like the Type 96 and Type 98, or I'm sorry, Type 96 and the Type 99 and the Type 99A and all those different series of new tanks, brand spanking new tanks. They are churning those out at a rate that we could never compete with our one factory in Lima, Ohio. In fact, so bad is it that it's very hard to find any Western sources that want to go into great detail about their production capacity for these new vehicles. Now understand, when older vehicles in China get phased out, they get passed on to reserves and to their huge gargantuan paramilitary machine. They get passed down. Most of their stuff doesn't get sold. Although some old things have been sold. China sells missiles, they sell rifles, China has so many rifles, it's ludicrous. I mean, they sell rifles and machine guns and older missiles, although they keep some old missiles in storage for later use too. But most of their obsolete stuff is what they sell off. I mean, the stuff that they consider obsolete is the stuff they sell off to other nations. But the stuff that they feel has real military value, that they can upgrade, that they can make better, sort of like how we upgraded the same old platforms for the last, 30 years or so. China does the same. They do the same. They put new optics, new radars, depending on what type of system it is, new targeting systems. You can teach an old dog new tricks, but it just depends on, what it is and how far you can upgrade a system, because you can only upgrade an old system so much. But what they do is they put all their brand spanking new stuff, their top tier stuff, into their active forces and some of their reserves, some of their reserves, and a little bit of their paramilitary. Then the really old but upgraded stuff gets passed down further. That's how you can have this 20 million man paramilitary force, all militarily trained and armed with surplus military equipment and gear. That's how you can have such a gargantuan force. And also how you can have this huge reserve now of some 5 million troops to go with their active forces. China has their military broken down into categories. They have Category A, which is top tier units that are ready to deploy immediately, who have the best gear, best equipment. It's either the stuff that either exceeds the West as far as how advanced it is, or it's the stuff that at the very bare minimum rivals anything the West has. Then you have Category B. Category B are your forces that are, they're pretty well armed. They're pretty well armed. They have a lot of their stuff rivals the West, or it's just barely maybe subpar, but it's good enough that they can take on any type of Western force. And then you have really light units like your National Militia, which is like a Category C force. They're like our National Guard, but they're paramilitary. It's not part of their actual PLA or part of their regular military. It's a paramilitary force. It's like a National Guard level force. They have a lot of lighter or older passed down stuff. They use a lot of armored trucks and a lot of MRAPs and things like that. They're not, and they use big anti-aircraft guns on the back. I mean, they're very light and they're very well suited for situations where light units are required. Like how I featured them in my Pacific Northwest map where they were fighting in the mountains. I mean, they train in these types of places, like the Himalayas and places like that, and all over China, Sichuan province, and even in the deserts of the Gobi and the Taklamakan Desert out in the west and Xinjiang. They train in Manchuria. I mean, where there's forests and things like that. They train all over communist China. So they're from all different parts of China. So some of them have abilities that other assets might not have. Like if they were training in Tibet, which is up there in the Himalayas, in the Himalayan plateau, they're going to be much more well suited to fighting in the Rocky Mountains than some heavy unit whose vehicles cannot go high up into the mountains, as their engines cannot take a certain lack of thin air. And I'm not only talking about helicopters, how they have big problems in mountainous environments. I'm talking about heavy battle tanks have this same issue. It's all about how fuel is burned, okay, in a vehicle, in a combustion engine. Now, if you have a certain height, it's not only about the grade of the height of the slope, it's also about the horsepower in the engine and how the horsepower tends to fail as you're going into higher altitudes because of the way the engine consumes fuel, if you all were interested in that. So these Chi-Com light units that use things like MRAPs or things like armored trucks that have big anti-aircraft guns of like 37 or 57 millimeter in the back, which basically have exploding tip bullets. Pretty big explosions. It's basically forces like that would be much better at mountain fighting than, some heavy force. Now, the Chinese have been very good at building light tanks. They used to be able to field light tanks in the Himalayan plateau because their Type 62G and their Type 63 were mainstays of their light tank fleet until they started to pass them down to paramilitary and also reserve units. While their new Type 15 tank, the Type 15, has a special oxygenator in it that helps the fuel consumption when it's in higher altitudes. It helps the combustion engine function much, much better than, say, a heavy tank that didn't have that type of tech or the ability to even integrate it because it's too heavy and the horsepower would suffer no matter what you did to it. But these lighter tanks that are about 39, 40 tons, that aren't like 50 or 60 tons, these lighter tanks are definitely much, much better for mountain warfare also, especially the new Type 15. So that was an interesting thing to read up on when I really started to read up on some of China's newer equipment. The stuff they're coming out with is very, very advanced. In fact, they're already putting out their second stealth fighter already. And it basically, it's a reverse engineered F-22 that has electronic warfare features in it. So it's not only stealthy, but it's electronic warfare. It also has more advanced radar than our F-22. I told you, these guys are masters at reverse engineering and improving on designs. So they basically took our F-22, made a carbon copy of it. See, our F-22 is like the crown jewels. The Congress even made it to where we can't even export it because that's how sensitive of the technology it is. But China's FC, or also called the J-31, is their carbon copy of our F-22 that's even improved upon. Now, they already have their Ch1na, which is basically the equivalent in all levels of performance. It's the equivalent of our F-22 already. And it was a purely indigenous Chinese-made design. So China already knows how to build stealth fighters. So it's not anything new for them to take our F-22 and improve on it and make their own new fighter off of it. So, yes, China has built many indigenous designs, but they also take other designs and they improve on them and they make them better. And they also make missiles and countermeasures and targeting systems and electronic warfare systems and other systems, missile cloaking systems, even that are made to defeat anything that the West possesses. Now, people talk about the West as, having all this tech, but you know what, though? What they don't understand is that shit's all Hollywood. Anybody in the military will tell you that that shit is all Hollywood. Yes, we do have some good tech, but all the stuff that people talk about, all these top secret weapons, that stuff is not being manufactured in some factories. It's not being mass produced. It's not deployed because it's not officially acknowledged, because it's in the R&D phase, or it's so sensitive that they want to keep it locked in some underground base forever and never let it see the light of day. That's why when we get invaded, you're going to have a superior China who's not shy about, there's a lot of secretive things in China. China doesn't have to worry about spies like we do. China is very much a secular humanist, despotic, repressive regime. They don't have to worry about keeping secrets because their whole society is built on snitching and secret police and MSS agents being everywhere, tapping into everything. Because the MSS is like a combo of like our FBI and CIA rolled into one. They're the ones that cultivate proxies. They're the ones that have fifth column saboteurs in their ranks. They're also the ones that police people secretly in China. So if anybody working in a Chinese arms factory, and most of those people are patriots to China anyway, if anybody tried to sell secrets from those factories, I'm sure it's quite impossible because I'm sure everything about those people is heavily monitored. I mean, my God, we're talking about a country that developed a social credit score. So, I mean, I'm sure China's not shy about deploying and mass producing their top secret technology. And it'll remain a top secret technology even so. Unlike ours, who are shy about it because we're afraid of people getting it. So we're going to keep it buried forever in some place in Nevada or wherever they work on these things. We're going to keep it hidden forever. We're never going to mass produce it. We're never going to get it to where it's even deployable or figured out or anything like that. Or where people are even trained on the stuff. You have to train people on new technology. You don't just field new technology and people automatically know what to do with it. No, you have to train people on this. If you were in the military, you know exactly what I'm talking about. People have MOSs, they have jobs, you have to go learn your job, and then you're never really fully, learned on it. You still have to go through the experience of having to train on it in field training and other types of training, and then you go deploy, and if your unit meets deployment readiness, then you get to deploy, because units can be held back from deploying if they're that ate up or if they're that garbage of a unit. They won't be allowed to deploy. They'll be forced to do more training to be able to proceed to being deployable. And our unit in 3rd ACR trained like you can't even understand. We went on field training exercises, it seemed like at least every 2 months, maybe even every month at times. And even if it was only a 1 week or a 2 week FTX, a field training exercise, or a month, or even a month long or more, I mean, we still did it very often to where we became very proficient killing machines. Now, you don't see, I mean, I was in a combat unit. I was field artillery, but being field artillery, just like as tankers, those 19 kilos, the tankers, I was a 13 Bravo, which means cannon crew member, and I was on a self-propelled artillery howitzer. But just like 19 kilo, 13 Bravos and 11 Bravos, which are infantry, all are combat arms, MOSs. That means they all share the same abilities as infantry at their core. They all have to have infantry training because they used us like infantry 75% of our time in Iraq. Only 25% did we do our real job of field artillery. The tankers, they got used a lot like infantry too. So I mean, but they have tanks, so a lot of times they did get to do their job as support. But there were other instances where they manned combat outposts, or they had to do like security patrols with other people in MRAPs and things like that. I mean, every mission was tailored in a certain way. I mean, there was no really one set standard. But anyways, yeah, I just wanted to make that known that, you would have to train people on any sort of emerging new technology. People aren't just going to know it right off the bat. It takes time to develop and deploy and manufacture things like that. So all the stuff that people see about, oh, we have all this stuff. No. That's Hollywood. That's propaganda. I mean, like I said, anybody in the military can tell you what we have or don't have. I mean, because, they're there. They do it every day. But right now, our military has become woke. It's become poorly trained. It's become exceedingly poorly led. I mean, my God, look who's leading it now. Look at who is in the Pentagon. Look at Milley. Look at. I mean, they're a bunch of slobs. Milley and Austin and all the rest of them. And look who's. I mean, they're all puppets anyway, you guys. But I mean, just look at who is leading things and making these policies at the Pentagon. Who's running it into the ground? They have run our military into the ground. There's a new generation of soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen, and they are not the same caliber or quality that I was or my friends were. Or even Yeshua is Coming channel is in my thread. He can tell you this new military we have now is not the same caliber as people like us were. Okay. We were in combat. We went to a conflict zone. We fought in combat. And we ended up running away from Afghanistan. And we've really done a shit job at anything we've done lately as an armed forces that they've asked of us to do. And I'm not talking about back when I was in. I'm talking about right now, as of lately, because all your experienced people have been purged. They've been purged. They wouldn't take the mark of the beast. They wouldn't submit to all the woke policies. So they were purged. They got kicked out for it. So all you're left with is this rot, this inexperienced green, and by green I mean relatively inexperienced, this green, inexperienced rot who have different values than the same values we had when I was in just 10 years ago. So I got out of the Army in 2012, all right? And it has changed a lot since I got out. In fact, it even started to change not even 3 months before I got out. That was when they repealed the certain thing in the military. That was step one. And ever since then, it's been rolling downhill. And when I retired, I've watched it crash and burn, okay? The military we have now is not the military that we used to have. And the sooner people can accept and understand that, the sooner they can accept and understand how much more powerful our enemies are, because they have been growing while we have been declining. Steady growing. They haven't stopped growing. We were at parity with them on our decline in 2017, 2018, as they were ascending. So we met in our capabilities about that time. 5 years later, they've still been growing, steady growing. Russia revived itself. China's the superpower. So now we're at a point to where our decline is so bad, while their ascent has been so great, that we don't stand any hope of a chance as far as defending our own country, our own land. And again, I'm not pro-Babylon. I'm not pro-China. I'm not pro-Russia. I'm pro-facts. These are facts. Facts. So I being pro-fact and being a person who cares about where he lives, yeah, I care about where I live, but I don't care about the system that runs it. But I care about where I live, and you best believe I'm going to defend myself from anybody that accosts me or comes after me. Sure. I don't care who they are. I don't care what they represent, where they're from. I'm going to defend myself. But you have to use common sense when you defend yourself. Like at first in a foreign invasion, it would behoove you to use common sense since you have no actionable intel. The lights are gone, communications are gone, you have no way to organize or do anything. You don't even have the right weapons to take on mechanized and armored forces and artillery and air support and cruise missile strikes and everything else. You don't have that type of ability. It would behoove you to evacuate first to the wilderness, to the woods, to the mountains, to wherever. You want to evacuate human settlements immediately. Take who you can with you, who can be saved. The young, the old, the frail, But I care about this, where I live. I care about the people here that want to learn more, that want to be able to navigate things. And that's why I thank you all for your patronage. Your patronage to my channel has been wonderful. I don't care about how big my channel gets. All I care about is the caliber of the people on my channel. I want people with brains, people that know what the score is, and they don't buy into propaganda. They don't buy into lies or hype or hysteria and all this other stuff. They sit there with their analytical brains and they take bits and pieces and weave them all together to make the big picture, learning how to see the forest from the single tree. That's what I want. I want my subscribers to be intelligent, to have brains, to see all the deception and the lies that are literally everywhere. Even in alternative circles, it's gotten so ludicrous. I can't even, man, I am so, I feel like I'm the only one that sees it sometimes. I really do. Because I'm the only one that crunches numbers, it seems like, and looks at all this stuff and says, hey, these narratives are total bullshit lies. And I'm sorry for cursing, but I just get passionate about this. I get passionate because it's a fact. You cannot believe some of these narratives that they're so ludicrous and so against what reality even states. Real facts, real figures, real capabilities, real numbers. Real economic and industrial output. I mean, you look at this stuff, and then you look at these narratives, and you're like, these people are insane. And the fact that people buy into it, and they don't go and try to see if what they're saying is valid or not. It just blows me away. I mean, all the stuff about Ukraine, it's just they lead people on wild goose chases. That's why I don't like to address it. I've said that since the beginning, before it even started, that it's a distraction. And it's many other things too. But yeah. Sorry, I gotta light a cigarette. Anyway, yeah, that stuff is a distraction. It's a deception, as much of a military deception and a trap for the West as it is a deception and a way to confuse the general Western public, because Western media does nothing but lie. Even Russian media puts out a bunch of hype stories because they want to get people in a fear and panic mode. Oh, yeah, we're going to nuke you guys. We're going to make a tsunami. Yeah, no. Not over a limited incursion. No, they're not going to do stuff like that. I mean, does anybody have common sense? I mean, like, it would literally have to be a world war, and it would have to be a situation to where it doesn't go against their overall objectives and intent for them to even do something like that or to even consider it. So anything a media source puts out, my point is that it's all bluster. It's all hot air. It's bluster. It's hot air and bluster and total garbage. It doesn't even make sense. You can even compare different narratives and be like, wow, they're intentionally trying to confuse people. I think Gonzalo Lira said it last night. He called it the Gelman effect. The Gelman effect, where you'll see something that you know is false, but then you'll read something on the same source that says more garbage, and then you start to believe garbage because your mind has been tricked into believing it. The Gelman effect. That's a good video. I think everybody should make time to go watch his video called The Gelman Effect and listen to his explanation of it and see if that resonates and makes sense with you. It should make sense with you. You should be able to understand it. By resonating, I mean have a literal grip on it, a literal understanding. Because there's a lot of people out there that really need to get a grip. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean that people have to get with being able to check multiple sources and learn how to cross reference. Cross reference means to overlay different information to see what the common trends are in the information. You can't just look at one or two or even three sources and say, oh, well, okay, well, I believe it because just these three sources said. No, you got to look at a bunch. So when I tell people I do mountains worth of research, I look at different sources from different places and I look for the truth by overlapping common information. So, and I do the best I can with all the research I do, and I've said I think I'm doing a damn good job. Not to pat myself on the back, because I am a humble person. I know I have, charisma now, but if you saw me in my beginnings on YouTube, I was really horrible at it, but I got better and better as time went on. And, now I'm at a point to where, now I have charisma. I've gotten into the point where I'm comfortable. I'm always confident, but I'm comfortable, meaning that I sort of now get the picture of how to do these types of presentations to where they come out at least quasi-professional. So, yes, I look at these things, I compare notes, and you have to look at multiple sources from multiple different avenues. You can't just look at just a bunch of Western sources or a bunch of Eastern. Like, you've got to look at neutral sources, Eastern, Western, everything. You've got to look at everything. And then you've got to compare numbers from multiple sources. And it could be any type of source. It can be like literal rosters. It can be production numbers. It can be all kinds of different types of sources. And then you overlap those with information that discusses, the overall numbers, and you could see which things overlap and which things do not, or which things make sense and which do not. And then you could continue. It takes a lot of mental gymnastics to be able to do that type of research, because you really have to have patience to do that level. Okay? You have to have a lot of patience to do that level of research. And patience is something I have because, I'm medically retired. I have time to do that now. I got injured in Iraq, and now I have all the time in the world to do research. And I'm an avid researcher. It's something I really enjoy. It's a hobby. It's always been. It's a pastime. Even when I was a young teenager, I loved doing research. I loved it, But I've had some crazy things happen in my life. I've had times in my life where, things got out of whack, and you know what I'm saying. But I mean, for the most part, I've stayed true to my origins as far as being an avid researcher. So before I get rambling on too much in that, I'll leave you all with this. I invite you all to go to my oil video, because oil resources and gas and timber and precious metals, all the things that are in North America that China wants, I highly suggest you go and look at that video. Which is mostly about oil, but you can take that in stride and understand that there are a lot of resources in North America, just the lower 48, which China wants to colonize, that they would love to have to boost their economy. And they also want to colonize the land. They see it as space. But most of all, they want the food. And Russia, like I said last time, has already seen the benefits of controlling resources and real commodities. They don't care how much fiat the West has. Russia can sell their commodities to China or India, but really China, because China's the industrial behemoth that never stops belching out military stuff and even consumer goods and everything else, ships, you name it. China is just steady belching out just everything you can imagine. And Russia wants to be there for their best friend China, the world superpower. And Russia wants to feed China's industry and get consumer goods in return. All they need to do is trade with each other. They don't need the West. But when you include the entire Eastern Eurasian bloc in that, with China and Russia as its de facto leaders, not really de facto, but they are the leaders for all intents and purposes, because China's Belt and Road, because of the Russian diplomacy, because of, Chinese military power, and also Russia's second, biggest military power. They are the leaders of a Eurasian bloc. So they do not need the Western bloc, but the Western bloc needs them, because we are seeing the boomeranging effects in our Western nations right now. And some people claim it's the Great Reset, whatever. It doesn't matter, because it's only affecting our part of the world. It's not affecting China. It's not affecting Russia. They don't play by the Western banking cabal's rules. They have their own rules. They are a different set of elites, like a different mafia set, Again, using that as a comparison. But I've gone on long enough, and I think I'm going to end it here. I just made it just shy of 2 hours, and my phone's about to die. So I really, really enjoyed having everybody to my Friday night rescheduled to Saturday night show. I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't feel all that great. I felt dehydrated. I felt tired, mentally foggy. I didn't feel like I would have brought my A game to a live. So yeah, I just wanted to tell everybody thank you, and I was very honored to have all of you. And I appreciate everybody on this channel who wants to learn about real facts, real figures, real everything, and not be caught up in all the fake, psyops and propaganda stories and all this other junk that gets put out. So you have to be really, really leery about everything. Question everything. Always question everything. Everything. When you see news articles, question everything. Don't ever, even in alternative media, don't ever just take anything you hear at face value. Do some background on it before you decide to, how do I say it? I guess endorse it before you decide to endorse it. Do a little bit of background. It never hurts. I'm talking about written articles as much as I'm talking about, streams or fucking videos. What? Oh, I'm sorry. I cursed. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know how that slipped out. I'm sorry. But anyway, I got to go. Y'all have a blessed night.